Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show. It is Thursday, August the 7th. One of the big differences between Canada's political parties is that when in power, Conservatives tend to leave hard-working Canadians alone to do their thing and set government up so that they can follow their dreams. Not so the Liberals, on the other hand. They try to set up government so that Canadians will follow what the Liberals think would be a better dream. Some people call it social engineering or wokeness. Whatever you call it, the Liberals just can't leave well enough alone, and it means they're always looking for more control. With me today is Peter Menzies, who has been patrolling this constituency for a couple of decades. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Peter, you had a long career in print media. You were publisher of the Calgary Herald. You actually were my old boss for several years, and then you were a CRTC commissioner. So you know print and you know electronic media, and of course, as the Liberals started pushing into the internet, you saw firsthand what was going on. So when I say they want to use newspaper subsidies to control what Canadians read, and the CRTC to control what they say on the internet and read on the internet, am I overstating my case?
I don't think you are. I think one of the fundamental differences between Conservatives and Liberals is that Liberals have a great deal of faith in government as a force for good and believe that when they do something, because they did it, it must be good. Whereas Conservatives have a more what I would call Jeffersonian approach, that government should only do what only government can do, and it should focus on doing that well, and generally have a more laissez-faire approach to the world. They will regulate things, of course, age restrictions for things like pornography and that sort of stuff. They're in favor of, but they do not get into the realm of what you may say and what you may not say, to the extent that the Liberals' instincts lead them there.
So there was a suite of bills that the Liberals brought in to control the internet, control what Canadians can do and say and read on the internet. There's Bill 11, Bill 18, and Bill C-63. The 63 didn't go through, but Peter, can you explain to us how the Liberals used those three bills, or intended to use them, in order to control the internet?
Sure. Well, I mean, part of the instinct goes back. I can remember a few years ago, Heidi Fry, who was head of the Heritage Committee in Parliament. But she said a few years ago, have you seen the internet? Oh my God, people can say anything on there, right? And so it sort of goes, holy, people can say anything. Well, I mean,
isn't that what our democracy is supposed to be about?
Exactly. The whole foundation of
Heidi Fry was an NDP,
a Liberal cabinet
minister.
Yeah. She's been for years. She's in her 80s now, but she has, I think she's most famous for talking about how, as we speak, they are burning crosses in Prince George.
Oh, I remember that.
And overstatements like that. But to me, that sort of expressed.
Well, that was kind of very free speech, wasn't it?
It was. But to me, that sort of expresses the instinct. Good heavens, people are saying anything they want. And I think they probably had a view before that if something happened that they didn't like, they could have lunch with the local publisher or something like that, and that they could count on their gatekeeping powers to ensure this. But they started with the Online Streaming Act was really where they started, and that was about giving the CRTC control over all audio and video on the internet.
The CRTC originally wasn't set up to do that.
No. The CRTC was set up to do over-the-air radio and television, which has to do with spectrum, which is a Crown asset, so they have a legitimate Crown purpose in regulating that. But they've always had rules about what you could say and couldn't say that go along with getting your television or radio license. But the internet, of course, is not a finite resource like spectrum. But they just decided that the internet was broadcasting. They basically just made that up because the internet isn't broadcasting, and gave the CRTC control over it. So far it has excluded podcasts, but it'll get into that eventually, just because that's the way regulatory creep works. But that sort of set the sign for the stage for managing how you consume content on the internet. It gets very complicated, so I won't go into all that. And then the Online News Act was about setting up a regime that would provide either through the government's actions or through its own resources, funding for media. And that involved media then being approved by a government appointed committee. And then the last one was Bill C-63, which died on the order paper when Justin Trudeau left, and that was called the Online Harms Act. And the most dangerous part about that was adding new powers or reinstating old powers to the Canadian Human Rights Commission so that you and I could complain about each other anytime we wanted.
Well, yes, that was an incredible intrusion into free speech rights. The idea, as I recall, the legislation that was dropped was that an individual who didn't like what I was saying or didn't like what you were saying could say, on the basis of what Mr. Menzies has said in the past, I think he's likely to say something hateful in the future.
Yes.
And therefore he should be, what was supposed to happen after that?
Well, I think you could go to court and get the police could go to the police, so they could go to court and get an order to restrict you to your premises.
Take away your computer
prior to an event. I'm not sure about taking away the computer, but I'm sure that probably denying access to the internet or some kind of, it went down that road. I don't want to say that it did or that it didn't because I don't have the stuff in front of me, but
this is the world of Minority Report. We think you might be about to do something, so we're therefore going to limit your freedom. You're under house arrest.
Well, yeah, it's exactly. It's one thing because our hate speech legislation came in to stop people from standing up on a podium with a megaphone or any other electronic means of communication and saying, tonight, I think people should pick up baseball bats and attack Presbyterians or any other specific group that they wanted to, that was hate speech that was intended to provoke violence against an identifiable group. And we're a long way from that when we get into, I think you might say something that might hurt somebody's feelings. Therefore, we will make sure you don't have access to any public forum.
Well, now, for the sake of the anxious viewer, let's just reemphasize that legislation did not go through. It died on the order paper when the Parliament was wrote to go for the last election. So that is not the law today. But it's the same government, almost man for man, woman for woman. You think this is going to come back, Peter?
Well, I think it'll come back certainly in some shape or form because some of the groups pushing for it originally, the original Online Harms Grap, the factors within the Jewish community were pushing for protection from things that could be said against them.
They should have pushed a little harder, Peter, by the sound of things.
Well, and the Islamic factors within the Muslim community were pushing for it too, because Islam was being criticized online, and they were opposed to that. And I think, as we've seen with the government's decision to, even without consulting Parliament, recognize the state of Palestine, that is a significant voting bloc that's being catered to and shifting Western political dynamics in, I want to say unforeseen ways, but they were foreseen but ignored.
Foreseen but ignored. How frequently is that the case? So let's see. So what we have is a government that, unlike the one that preceded it, which tended to just leave people to, keep the law, but think what they want, read what they want, talk what they want. You've got now a government, and we've had a government for 10 years, that cares very deeply that you think the way they think you should think.
Yes, the rest of you, I think Justin Trudeau expressed it very well when he referred to people with unacceptable views. So I think that might include you from time to time too, but heaven forbid. But this whole idea of getting into this approved and disapproved, the state. I mean, these are things that churches did, right? No, that is apostate. That is blasphemy. That is this. Those sorts of controls. These were not things that liberal democracies engaged in. and yet they just keep going that way. And it's actually very frightening to see, because you realize how authoritarianism grows, right? When people who seem like nice people, who say they're doing this to keep us safe, it's always about safety, right? It's always about your safety, your emotional safety. And one thing about physical safety, that's an entirely different thing. But if it's about your emotional safety, so you might say something that just, triggers me or makes me go, oh my God. I mean, I don't feel safe, in this. And that's what happened with the evangelical singer last week. People were saying, well, I don't know, that people going to his concert, I know that what sort of people would be going to his concert? They could be walking by my house. I don't feel safe. And people react to that rather than saying, pull yourself together, right? Do you, find counseling, see a priest, do something.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you, we're talking about Schoenfurt, or however you
pronounce that name,
German name.
Carefully, I think.
Yes, it's under your breath, behind your hand. I'd never heard of this guy until about 10 days ago. The knock on him is apparently that he has a suite of opinions that 20 years ago would have been pretty unremarkable. He's not a fan of gay marriage. He thinks the whole LGBT thing is immoral. He is avowedly, openly Christian, wants to worship God with raised hands and so forth, which is, some people, that's how some people do worship, and they've been free to do that for a couple thousand years.
Yes.
He has also spoken up for Donald Trump in the United States, which is not surprising. That there is a certain there's certainly quite a faction among Trump's followers who would identify as born again Christians.
Yeah,
and he sings their music.
Yep.
So yes, he's a Trumper, and that, I think, was what got him kicked off a Parks Canada site in New Brunswick, which is where this particular line of news began. And the reason they kicked him off was that it didn't align with Parks Canada values.
Yes.
Which were to promote inclusion and safe spaces.
Right.
Now, a couple of questions fall out of that. First of all, when did government agencies start having values that, collect the money as you go into the park and stick it in the box?
Yes.
And keep your grass cut.
Yes.
Those are values.
And don't litter. That should be about the end of it. But that is a perfect example of how something that sounds harmless, right? Because it's going to be inclusive. We have, this is what we value. Now you can value that within your employment ecosystem. You can do that if you want, but you don't invent values like that could be violated peacefully by any citizen or any visitor or any visitor. They do. And that's the sort of, if you point to something like that when it first occurs, people will say, well, that's a little kooky. Aren't you being a little paranoid? But there's a long bit of evidence you can go back and say, well, this is what it leads to. Because what appears to be harmless has suddenly been used. It's been weaponized. Values have been weaponized to use. Some people will agree with, obviously, following social media, lots of people agreed with it. There was a rush of people agreeing with it. Many of us disagreed with it because we're hung up on this old-fashioned idea that you are going to be offended in life, right? There were, as Mom used to say, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you, sort of thing, that you got to suck it up, buttercup, and get through life. And that is true tolerance. I'm sure this singer and I could sit down and talk for quite a while, and I would leave in disagreement with him, or there could be others that do. But he has a right to hold views that some people find offensive, provided he's not calling for harm to be done to anybody. This liberal definition seems to be that holding the view is itself harmful, right? Just if you hold a view that is unfashionable or old-fashioned or
or not liberal,
or not within their very narrow, I think that's called the Overton window of acceptable views. And that's what you see the CBC generally present. And that window is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. So people who hold views that even 5, 6, 10 years ago were perfectly mainstream are now out of the mainstream, right? And that applies social pressure and eventually legislative and regulatory pressure on your behavior.
So this is starting to sound a lot like the kind of society that the Soviet Union established for its own citizens back in, well, I guess they got 1917, but they got control around by 1921, and that's what they started doing. And you see that with every authoritarian regime that we've seen in the last 100 years. And probably if you were a historian and you wanted to go further back, you would see it with the French Revolution and and the English Revolution. The Roundheads who are not particularly tolerant of dissenting religious views. But this is what we're talking about: is a secular religion that this government holds to and is trying to force fit upon an entire country.
Pretty much. I mean, I used to think it was just used for their political opponents, right? The old practice of demonizing your political opponents, so which both parties have always historically tried to use, but it's spilled out of Parliament and into the streets so that we are now pointing at each other or given the power to.
You mentioned the opponents. I mean, as you know, I worked for Harper for 6 years. Well, I don't recall us in that period of time having these kinds of mind control programs. In fact, they would have been anathema to Mr. Harper. But, there wasn't even anything being quietly done by the sneaky operatives. What's the difference between the conservative way of thinking and the liberal way of thinking?
Well, I think the difference between I'll use one case to sort of illustrate a point. There was the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council. This was when I was at the CRTC, which is the sort of proxy for the CRTC content control, like swear words and that sort of stuff that you're not supposed to say. And they banned based on the complaint of one woman in Newfoundland, the Dire Straits song "Money for Nothing" was banned because it uses an old-fashioned reference to gay men that was the same word the English used to use to refer to a cigarette. And this caused this woman offense. So the playing of that song was banned. So what happened in that case was, with some encouragement, the CRTC suggested that the Broadcast Standards Council review its decision, that this was sort of an extreme move to do that. Now, I think Dire Straits themselves re-recorded the song to use a different word or something like that, but that to me illustrated the instincts of that government, which was like, whoa, right? Like, sure, people shouldn't gratuitously offend each other. Like I think everybody agrees with that you shouldn't, but you are free to do it. The state will not intervene and ban you or ban your music or that sort of stuff. And that's, like I said, it entirely different. Whereas the Liberals assume that state intervention is always useful. I think that's my take on it anyway. There may be occasions when they don't, but they think that if they do it, it must be good. And it doesn't really matter how extreme it is because, well, we wouldn't do anything extreme, would we? We're liberals. We don't do that, but they do it more and more and more.
So, I mean, it's easy for you and I, with our backgrounds and our experience in the industry, to sit here and damn the darkness. But from the perspective of the viewer, the person in the living room, the person on the street, how do you push back against this? I mean, do you just make yourself a martyr, and by martyring yourself, illustrate the darkness that is descended upon us, or is there a better way of doing it?
Well, it's really challenging. I guess one of the things you can do is retire and just become and then you're free to say whatever you want. But there's social.
Well, actually, you're not.
Well, no, I'm not, but I'm more free than I am within the sort of social
You don't have an employer to cut you off in the past.
That's
but
right.
if I were to just pull you out a little more, Peter, and you say what you really think, we could probably get a human rights later.
I'm just saying it in a good way. But there's corporate pressure because a lot of companies have this sort of stuff, and people will turn somebody in.
Yes,
right. People will say. I mean, you people get pushed out. HR departments have also moved into the realm of values and feelings, not actions.
You want the foreman's job, you know how to get it.
Yes. And then there's social pressures, like you go to parties and barbecues and that sort of stuff, and you look around and you say something, and then you don't get invited to any more parties. And this sort of casual social pressure is, I mean, I'm pretty convinced that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about some of these big questions and big policies, particularly socially. They just kind of look around and see what the popular view is and quietly adopt that, right? Because we're human beings and we want to be accepted socially and have status within at least our peer groups. Now, there's other types of peer groups, like the Western Standard peer group, where you could say something like, I don't know, I don't think all regulation is bad, and I might not get invited to a party, right? Depending on how many libertarians are around me, right?
No, but you might get taken down to the Fox and have things explained to you. That's which is our more gentle way of dealing with social deviation. No, but I mean it's a problem, all right, for people who. And I thought you were going to say something like you develop communities that are safe. You find the people who agree with you, and you just look after each other.
Well, you said that much better than I did.
Starting with social deviation. Yeah. Look, we're almost out of time here, Peter. I hate to say it, but there's one thing that you wrote just a couple of days ago that really intrigued me. You've been a frequent critic of the federal program that permits that gives money to newspapers to keep them from going bust.
Yeah.
And we share that. We don't take that subsidy here in the Western Standard. To our cost, I might add. However, you then came out and said, never mind all that. It's going to be AI that takes down the newspapers.
It could be, yeah.
How does that work?
Well, AI scrapes information from the internet, right? So it needs dependable information. So on the one hand, it could actually rescue newspapers, but if you can get an appropriate commercial agreement between, say, if AI wants to use Western Standards content, in my mind, that doesn't count as fair use under the Copyright Act, because you're using it to build a global commercial platform. So Western Standard would have to be compensated in that example. That's if they do that, right? Or if they are encouraged to it, or if they are legislated to do it, which is sort of one thing. That's what the Online Harms Act missed. It went with links when you could see AI coming. On the other hand, if you are a newspaper reporter or a reporter of any kind, a platform reporter, news reporter, and all you do is rewrite press releases and maybe throw in a quote, you're cooked, because AI can do that. You can just, and for smaller publishers, that can actually be quite useful, right? You can just feed the news releases into your system and you'll get a quick rewrite of it. You don't have to hire have your reporter spending time doing that. You can actually then take your journalism resources and apply them to getting what we used to call enterprise news, which is news you find through your own digging and that sort of stuff, which is exclusive to you. So it could be a savior, but it could just kill the whole thing because the big impact it's had so far is people don't go to links anymore the way they used to, right? Already there's like a 20% decline in people going to links, and platforms need people to go to links to see the advertising, to buy subscriptions. That's their source of revenue is through links. And if that continues to decline, then media will be in real trouble, unless their salvation could also be people subscribing. So I would encourage people watching this to subscribe to Western.
It's less than going to the movies for a month of
Absolutely.
of hot news.
And you might save democracy while you're doing it.
Well, let's do it then.
Yeah.
Get your subscriptions while they're hot. Peter, it's great to see you again.
It was a great pleasure, Nigel.
We need to do more of this, but thanks to Peter Menzies, former Calgary Herald publisher, former CRTC commissioner, and friend of the Western Standard. And just take a look in the background, and you see real reporters, not artificial intelligence, real reporters doing news for the Western Standard. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.